Well, good morning, everyone, and happy Friday. Welcome to our Facebook Friday Live segment, Caring Conversations, where we look forward to bringing topics that are relevant to our clients, their families, our caregiving teams, and our healthcare partners. My name is Julie Collada, and I'm the founder and president of Open Arms Solutions. And Open Arms Solutions provides a professional care team of caregivers and care coordinators that helps seniors and their families navigate the challenges of aging, and we proudly support their dignity and their independence in their own homes. With me today, this morning, is our own Scott Tolan, our memory care director who manages our Embraced by Open Arms memory care program. Scott, welcome.
Thank you, Julie.
Today's topic is it dementia? Or what do I call it? And it's that question that so many of our families have. And I know I personally had when my mom all of a sudden wasn't able to navigate a microwave or an oven. I didn't know what it was, right? And dementia is a broad term that indicates some form of cognitive impairment.
Correct.
And it's kind of an umbrella over a lot of very specific kinds of dementias. In fact, Scott, I've heard different numbers. How many different kinds of dementias are there?
Yeah, that's a really good question. On the low side, I've heard like perhaps about 75. And on the really high side, I've heard upwards of 400, which I had a little difficulty accepting, but nevertheless, it's a pretty large number either way.
So it's important to best we can understand that dementia, it's not one size
fits
all.
Correct. Absolutely.
It's a broad term about someone not being able to, some kind of thinking process,
correct,
if you will, that has been impaired.
That's a big part of it. Yeah.
So once the diagnosis is made, individuals can be at a loss for now specifically, we know this, what kind of dementia they have.
Right.
The differences among the types of dementia can often be significant in better understanding and treating and interacting with your loved one.
Absolutely.
So that's the focus of our discussion this morning, is to better discuss the more common types of dementia and get into a little bit more detail about each one. So for those of you that have not had the opportunity to either be part of this program or meet Scott, Scott, as I mentioned before, is I'm happy to say and proud to say he is our memory care director and really runs our solely focused on our Embraced by Open Arms memory care program. He's doing a wonderful job.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
Yeah. Sure.
And what got you to the journey that allowed us to work together?
Sure. Well, I've been in the aging services field more generally for many years. It's always been an enjoyment of mine. But my particular passion within the field has always been dementia. Even before I was actually working in the aging field, I was doing a lot of research on my own in terms of trying to understand the disease, a lot of the clinical aspects of it, and just really digging into a lot of the information that was available. And then I realized as I was working in the aging field over the years, I really need to do my best to specialize in this area of dementia. So I had the opportunity over the last number of years to run various dementia residences, both on the assisted living and skilled nursing sides. And then in combination with that, I've done some other work on the care management side, as well as working for a time for Adult Protective Services. So all of these positions really exposed me to people with dementia and their families. And about a year and just shy of a year and a half ago, I had the fortunate opportunity to see your posting for this position, and have been with Open Arms since August of last year, as you say, running the Embrace Memory Care program, Memory Care at Home program, and also working with some of our other clients who have some form of memory impairment.
All right, that's great. Well, we, as you know, obviously, but for the folks that are listening, we actually hired a consultant to
Correct.
help us with the search. Someone who had actually been really running a very successful program in Arizona, and they set up the criteria that allowed us to find you. So definitely appreciated that assistance from them. So I guess maybe the appropriate question to start out right now in our discussion is how do I know what type of dementia my loved one has?
Yeah. Well, the common phrase around the field is, ultimately only your neurologist or your neuropsychologist knows for sure. And really the point of that comment is that unless there's some fairly rigorous testing, cognitive testing, and followed up by image testing, which we can get into here shortly, there's really no way of specifically knowing which type it is. Although specialists in the field have gotten very good based on their expertise in diagnosing the different types. Sometimes they're wrong, honestly, and that can cause some real issues. But the vast majority of the time when a diagnosis is made of a specific type of dementia, it's generally fairly accurate. And again, those diagnoses really are not confirmed unless the individual really seeks out additional clinical care from a specialist in the field.
Okay. Thank you for that. So what are the major types of dementia? What are the, you mentioned there's anywhere between plus 75 and many more, but there are some that are much more prevalent than others.
Yeah, absolutely. And for certain, just to streamline it for the purposes of our discussion and otherwise, there's really about what I would categorize as 6 major types. Not surprisingly, Alzheimer's is, and by the way, you did a really good job of describing dementias is an umbrella term, and these are all types of dementia that are like what I refer to as the spokes of the umbrella. So these would be specific types. So Alzheimer's, the major one. Estimates again vary as to the percentages. Roughly, I'm going to say 60 to 70%.
Yeah, I think that's what I've heard too.
Yeah, of the individuals who are diagnosed have it of the Alzheimer's type. A second significant type is known as vascular dementia. And as the term suggests, this usually corresponds to issues related to coronary artery disease, people who perhaps have had frequent heart attacks, or most importantly, strokes, and their vascular system is highly compromised. And as a result of that, particularly in later years, they develop vascular dementia. A third type, which is less common and has received more prominence of late, people like Robin Williams had this type of dementia. It's called Lewy bodies dementia. And Lewy body dementia can be very confusing because it can often mimic aspects of Parkinson's disease, rigid gait, hallucinations and or delusions. Some of those primary aspects that really are a hallmark of Parkinson's as well as Lewy bodies. And this is where it can be really confusing sometimes for the neurologist or the neuropsychologist to determine which is which, because these symptoms overlap in terms of the care. There's also one that is known as frontal temporal dementia. This is the type of dementia that comes on at a fairly young age. Some of the hallmarks of that is impulsivity in people who were functioning quite well in society, and all of a sudden their behavior becomes extremely erratic. They become very unpredictable. In terms of community care, for example, I always describe these individuals as they tend to be those, if you go to a community, who tend to do a lot of pacing or walking in pattern circles. That just tends to be something that with that type of disease is very common. And then I mentioned previously kind of the overlap between Lewy bodies, and there's also something known as Parkinson's related dementia. And that can be with or without Lewy bodies. So it could just be that as a result of someone's Parkinson disease, they eventually develop dementia. And then finally, there is something known as a mixed dementia. So someone, for example, might have a combination of Alzheimer's and vascular dementia, or as I said, they might have a combination of Parkinsonian dementia mixed with the Lewy bodies. So it can get pretty complicated.
Yeah, it really can. And I think the thing to think about, or the question is, well, why do we care what the different?
Yeah.
Why do we care?
Yeah, and that is a really good question. And I know I've had family members kind of say that to me, and I always say, well, I think it's significant for several reasons. First of all, if we look at it from the clinical perspective, some of the medications that we use, for example, to treat Alzheimer's disease and that work effectively, namely some of the antipsychotics, when those are administered, they can be beneficial in limited use for people with Alzheimer's. But unfortunately, certain of those antipsychotics, when they're given to people, for example, with Lewy bodies disease, can just make the situation considerably worse. And that's one major reason why it's important to try and tease out and to go to a specialist who, specializes in these different types of dementia and who understands the medications associated with that. The other aspect, which I think touches on the work that we do at Open Arms and specifically in the Embrace program, is that it really does dictate to a certain extent how we structure activities, engagements, and our more task-oriented procedures. Because if you know, for example, that someone with Lewy bodies is going to be experiencing hallucinations and delusions, and you as a caregiver are prepared to deal with those. If you're not familiar with those and you're not used to dealing with them, again, as a caregiver, it can be very daunting.
Yeah.
So that's just one example of how knowing the more information you have about your loved one's dementia, the better off I think you're going to be in the long run.
Yeah, Scott, I agree. It's so important. And for all the reasons that you mentioned, and for family members, I think and I've shared with on this program and with different people, my mom had a mixed dementia.
Correct.
Right. And when that was diagnosed, it was a combination of vascular dementia and Alzheimer's disease.
Right.
And and my mother-in-law, who passed away last year that we cared for, had Alzheimer's disease. And I remember the family kind of struggling with, I remember struggling, years and years and years ago with my mom, and I watched my husband and in-laws and everyone struggle with, why is my mom asking me the questions all the time?
Yeah, exactly.
Why aren't they why are they getting confused with what is Sarah my sister, or is Sarah my granddaughter, or why is that happening?
Yeah.
And I know one thing that you're going to be doing, and you do in your education, and one of the things I know is a really important tenet of the Embrace program is education, family education. And one of the things, as you're doing right now, and we're doing right now in this program, is educating people about the different dementias and what parts of the brain are affected.
Right.
With the different dementias.
Right.
And I know that for me personally and my family, when we started to understand what the hippocampus was, and that was part of the brain where short-term memories are stored.
Sure.
And at the early stages of something like an Alzheimer's disease, that hippocampus is what starts to get affected.
That's absolutely right. Yeah.
And so that's one of the reasons that people keep asking the same question.
Yeah.
And once you have a little bit more knowledge about why your loved one's doing that, they're not
Right.
doing it to annoy you. They're not
No.
doing it, but they're doing it because their brain is starting to misfire and
Correct.
break down.
Correct. Absolutely.
And, since we can't see that, it's not like a broken arm or a bandage we can put on, but it's
Yeah.
really that education piece is so vital. And all these different kinds of dementias, as you described, the frontal temporal dementia affects
Right.
the frontal temporal region of the brain.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
so it's actually fascinating. As we know, the brain is incredibly powerful and fascinating organ.
Yeah.
And when it starts to break down, it's really difficult. But more education, more understanding, I think, is really key for families and
Absolutely.
caregivers.
Absolutely. Uh-huh.
Well, we've talked about a lot of different topics already. If we talked about, how might the different types of dementias my loved one have affect decision making about should we care for this person in the home? Are they safe to have care in the home, or is it really better they're safer in a community that specializes in memory care? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question, and that does come up often. I really say that everyone's situation is different. I think there are some usual indications where families, even with caregiver support and the best education and training that we can do, for example, as a home care agency, they really believe that it's best in the end to put their loved one in a residential situation. That might be something along the lines of consistent elopement. That tends to be a big issue because loved ones get out, they incur significant danger being out and lost. A lot of times law enforcement needs to get involved, things like that. So that can become a very, very dangerous aspect of the disease. And certainly there are ways of addressing that at home and teaching and training. But sometimes it's just gets to the point where really the person would be in a safer environment elsewhere. I think the other one that families tend to face significantly and becomes a huge challenge is just the outburst of verbal and particularly physical aggression. Now, again, oftentimes with proper coaching, training, caregiver involvement, in our case, for example, families can be educated as to how to address that. And oftentimes we work hand in hand with the physician or the specialist to make sure that the medications are being administered correctly and at the right dosages. Those things can often be really helpful in kind of stabilizing the individual. But again, it really is up to each family to decide that. And part of our Embrace program is really to help them with that decision-making process when the time comes. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because, there is, and based on what you've seen in the years you've worked with dementia patients and families, what kind of support do you see families needing?
Yeah. Well, I think, as you said, education a lot of times is a big piece of it. And that's obviously a very, very broad term. But a lot of it, I think, boils down to communication techniques and strategies. You mentioned, your own family situation where you encountered aspects of the disease that it's like, well, why is she doing that, or why is she saying those things? And again, proper education in terms of how people with dementia communicate. And as you know, obviously, one of the aspects that we really focus on in our training is both from the standpoint of caregivers, our caregivers, and also family members, is really different ways of communicating with your loved one so that you're in a better position to address some of those unexpected responses, behaviors, challenges, what have you. So to me, that's a big piece of it. And also outside of what we're able to do at Open Arms, I think, living in the Chicagoland area anyway, you have an opportunity to really take advantage. Now, obviously with COVID, like everything else, we're having to meet these limitations now, but there are a lot of different support groups that families can avail themselves of, and even those are being done virtually now. Things like memory cafes. So a lot of it too is the support piece. And so I think those are some of the major things that family members can do to really educate themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And you'd mentioned memory cafes. So probably some of people may have not heard that term.
Yeah,
Why don't we just talk a little bit more about what a memory cafe is?
sure. So traditional support groups for any of the types of dementias are usually focused on the family member exclusively. And the realization came about a number of years ago in overseas, I believe in the UK, that it made sense to incorporate family members in some type of collaborative meeting situation. So that's really how memory cafes were born. So at its core, memory cafes are basically an opportunity for a spouse and or loved one to go to a social setting. And again, obviously with COVID right now, we're limited, but hopefully soon we'll be back. But go to a social setting put on by an agency and offer an opportunity to be there with their loved one and then other people and their loved ones who are experiencing dementia as well. So, and there's usually a focus and an activity designed for that particular day. Things like improv acting approaches and singing and all kinds of different really neat exercises that the group can take part in. But it's really an opportunity to provide a social support network for people with dementia and their loved ones.
Yeah, that's a great explanation. And I would just add that it's also a safe place for people to go.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
it's a place where people can, people with dementia still have a lot to give.
Yeah.
And receive and live life.
Absolutely. A lot of purpose.
And it's just the idea of the memory cafe is so lovely in that, and I've been part of a couple of them, and it is so lovely where you can go with your loved one,
yeah,
be a family, and know that you're there with people that are dealing with the same things, and it's safe. It's okay. It's okay if your loved one, does something that only someone with dementia would do. It's okay.
Exactly. Yeah,
you're in a safe place.
You're in a supportive environment.
You're a very supportive environment. So it's a great.
Yeah. Hey, Julie, before we get further, I do want to address, we do have a viewer question. I want to make sure before, if that person has to leave or otherwise.
Sure. Great.
So the viewer question is, have you noticed more decline in general due to isolation, lack of stimulation, and lack of socializing because of COVID? I hate to say it, but the honest answer is very much yes. I know communities, for people who are in communities who have dementia, have really been struggling because their ability to do the things that keep people stimulated, those group activities, those group engagements have been so limited and in some cases absent. What we actually have the opportunity to do, and admittedly this is only available to certain individuals, but we have actually moved our Embrace program into some of those communities to help support through our caregivers more direct one-on-one stimulation and engagement. But in general, absolutely, I think we are really seeing the effects of that. And unfortunately, I think that's a part of the significant COVID death numbers that we're seeing at the community level in particular. So
Oh, yeah. Thank you for that question.
yeah, yeah,
It's a it's a serious issue right now.
yeah, absolutely, no doubt.
Um, Scott, can there be a temporary cause of dementia? Is it possible that
Yeah,
someone can exhibit some of the symptoms of dementia and then, you
yeah,
know, it not be permanent? Because I
yeah.
certainly,
No,
that was a thought that went
yeah,
to my mind.
right. No, it's a good question. We refer to those as the reversible forms of dementia, and there are several reasons. Vitamin deficiencies, for example, particularly B12, we found historically is a big one that can bring on temporary states of dementia-like behaviors and concerns, and then once the person's B12 level is adjusted appropriately, the dementia, by and large, goes away. Certain falls, especially if it's someone who hits their head, that can bring on a temporary state of dementia. And once the head injury is treated properly, again, uh, by and large, that can go away. The other one that's common is that people who have been hospitalized, and I'm sure, with COVID, this is part of it as well. People who have been hospitalized for any lengthy period of time can develop what's referred to as delirium, which is clearly dementia-like symptoms, and they are usually because of various aspects of the hospitalization, lack of movement, lack of exercise, poor nutrition, whatever it might be. But that can be a really scary thing. I experienced that myself for a very brief period with my mother before she passed, and fortunately I was able to realize what it was, but it can be very, very daunting for family members who experience that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And that is very common. I would add another one that's very common, and it's always such a relief when we find this out, is when one of our clients starts to suddenly have a real change in their behavior and their cognition. And we say, oh, could it be a urinary tract
Right,
infection?
exactly.
And, everyone's crossing their fingers and toes and everything else,
Right.
we've learned,
Yeah.
hoping that that's what it is, because that can be so easily and quickly
Yes.
addressed
Yes. Thank
with
you
an
for
antibiotic. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for including that one because that is a significant one. And it really goes back to the old adage, people just need to stay hydrated, and then it doesn't get any better as you age. I mean, the more liquids you drink and stay hydrated, the better chance you are of avoiding those kinds of situations.
Yeah, sure. Um, well, Scott, we're almost out of time. There's just a couple more minutes, but
Right.
what if who makes the initial diagnosis?
Yeah.
We talked about this actually a couple of weeks ago in
Yeah.
our uh, a Facebook Live, but just
Right.
for people who may not know about this. So who would
Yeah.
make the diagnosis?
Yeah. So a lot of times people do go to their primary care physician. And, primary care physicians have so much on their plate. And I think what we found is that it really depends on the individual primary care physician to do a more expansive or exhaustive job of trying to isolate memory problems. I mean, there are some basic tests that actually physicians are kind of obligated, if you will, to give to their clients. Unfortunately, that doesn't always happen. But things like the mini mental exam, which again is not a particularly strong test, but at least can pinpoint some symptoms. And the problem is that physicians, a lot of times, they just don't have that time with their patients to do those tests. But typically, a good primary care physician, if he or she suspects there are more significant memory impairment issues, will refer the person to, as I said earlier, either a neuropsychologist who will do a battery of neurocognitive tests, or actually directly to a neurologist who would do a combination of that testing, but also imaging testing that I referred to earlier, things like MRIs and various forms of PET scans, which are a little more involved. But we are fortunate again here in Chicagoland that we have a lot of those hospitals that are specializing in it. We certainly have Advocate Lutheran in Park Ridge, to name one. Of course, Rush is historically very well known for their work in Alzheimer's.
Northwestern.
I was going to say Northwestern, which is the expert for frontal temporal dementia in particular. And then finally, what used to be Alexian Brothers Behavioral Health is now Amida out in, I believe it's Hoffman Estates or that area. And they have offices throughout the Chicagoland area. So just to name a few, I mean, you've got some resources in the Chicagoland and surrounding area for those kinds of needs.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Scott, we're out of time.
Okay. So it went fast, Julie, I tell you.
It always does.
Wow.
It always does.
Yeah.
Hey, thank you so much.
Sure.
And to people that are watching, if we didn't touch on a topic that's important to you,
right.
If a question has come up, please reach out to us. I would contact Scott. Sarah, can you pop up Scott's contact information real quickly? It's Scott.Tolan.
Yep. Scott.Tolan at openarms, plural, solutions.com. And I can also be reached telephone-wise at 847-612-9105. And again, I am available to discuss any of these related matters. So,
or any question that you have, we'd be
happy
to help.
Yep.
All right, Scott, thank you. Thank you,
All
everyone, for listening.
Thanks, Julie.
Happy holidays, everyone.
Yes. Bye-bye.
Bye now.